Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of chaos. Everything around you is loud, fast, overwhelming. Your heart's pounding, your breath shortens, your mind races. Maybe it's an argument, maybe it's failure, maybe it's fear, but now imagine this. You are still, focused, unshaken, like the eye of a storm. That's not a fantasy. That's not reserved for monks or Navy SEALs. That is what it looks like when you train your mind to stay calm in any situation, and it's achievable. The human brain is hardwired for survival, not peace. That means, under stress, it wants to react fast, fight, flee, freeze. Your amygdala, your limbic system, your sympathetic nervous system, they take control before you even think. And that's the problem. If you let biology drive behavior, you will always be a slave to your environment. You will react instead of respond. But the moment you realize that your nervous system can be trained, that calm is not something you're born with, it's something you build. That's when everything changes. Neuroscience tells us that calm is not the absence of stress. It's the presence of control, and control begins with awareness. Most people wait for the storm to hit before they try to calm down. That's like learning to swim while drowning. Instead, you train ahead of time. You condition your brain to handle adversity by choosing discomfort. You get in cold water. You hold your breath. You delay gratification. You meditate when your mind is screaming for distraction. That's not just mental strength. It's neural rewiring. When you breathe deeply through your nose, extend your exhale, anchor your attention in your body, you are literally sending signals to your brain. We are safe. Stay present. You're not just calming yourself emotionally, you are shifting your physiology from a reactive state to a responsive one. You're quieting the amygdala. You're activating the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that makes decisions, evaluates options, and doesn't panic. That's where clarity lives. Calm is not passive. Calm is a high-performance state. Repetition is the gateway to mastery. Just like muscles grow with tension and rest, mental resilience grows when you put pressure on the system and then recover. The more often you put yourself in controlled stress, breathwork, deliberate cold exposure, disciplined routines, the more your mind becomes familiar with discomfort. Familiarity breeds stability. What used to trigger you becomes neutral. What used to scare you becomes manageable. That's neuroplasticity in action. Here's the truth. Life will challenge you. You will face things that feel unfair, unpredictable, even unbearable. You don't control the storm. You control your system. And if you want power, not just emotional power, but neural power, you have to train like it's a skill, not a gift. Not once, every day. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. So the question isn't whether you can stay calm. The question is, are you willing to train for it? Because in the moments where most people break, you could be the one who bends and returns stronger. And when your mind knows how to be calm, not because the world is quiet but because you are, you become unstoppable. Most people think that calm is something you're either born with, or not. They assume some individuals are just naturally zen, while others are anxious, reactive, or easily overwhelmed. But that's a myth, a deeply ingrained one. And neuroscience tells us something completely different. Calm is not an inherited personality trait. It's not about being laid back or emotionally numb. It's a skill, a trained physiological and psychological state that you can build, layer by layer, through intentional practice. When I say train your mind to stay calm, what I'm actually saying is, train your nervous system to respond, instead of react. Because what we call calm is simply a nervous system that's been conditioned to handle stress without dysregulation. Your brain, especially the amygdala, is designed to overreact. That's evolution. It's meant to detect threats fast, often before you even realize it. And in a survival context, that's useful. But in a modern context, it's a problem. That same overactive threat detection system is now reacting to emails, criticism, traffic, deadlines, social pressure, things that aren't actually life-threatening, but your brain treats them like they are. The result, you get overwhelmed, agitated, impulsive. You default to primitive behavior, fight, flee, freeze, when what you actually need is stillness, clarity, and poise. But here's the key, we are not stuck with that default wiring. Thanks to neuroplasticity, we can change it. You can teach your brain that not every surge of stress means danger. You can retrain your body to interpret pressure, not as a threat, but as a signal to slow down, breathe, and anchor your attention. That's not done once. It's done daily. Through consistent exposure to small intentional challenges, you create a new baseline, one where calm is your prepared state, not your lucky state. This is not theory, this is measurable. You can track shifts in heart rate variability, cortisol regulation, and brainwave activity. When a person regularly trains themselves to stay calm under pressure, it becomes ingrained. That's why I always say calm isn't a personality, calm is preparation, and like any high-performance skill, it's not about having it when things are easy, it's about having it when everything in your environment is telling you to lose it, and you don't. Reactivity is your brain's default setting. That's not a flaw, it's biology. Your nervous system is built to keep you alive, not to keep you calm. The moment your brain perceives a threat, real or imagined, it activates a cascade of responses through the sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, your breathing becomes shallow, and blood is redirected to large muscle groups to prepare for action. That's what we call the fight or flight response. And here's the catch, this sequence is triggered far faster than conscious thought. By the time you realize you're stressed, your body is already in motion. You're already reacting. This is why, in moments of stress, we say or do things we regret, because we're no longer operating from our prefrontal cortex, the logical decision-making part of the brain. We're running on instinct, on limbic energy, on old neural circuits designed to solve problems with speed, not with precision. And yet, if you want to be effective under pressure, if you want to be the person who performs, leads, or stays grounded when others unravel, you need to build the ability to interrupt this automatic reactivity. That starts with awareness. You cannot change what you don't observe. In neuroscience, we call this interoception, the ability to sense the internal state of your body. The better you get at recognizing the early signs of stress, tight chest, shallow breath, clenched jaw, the sooner you can intervene and redirect your system. You're not trying to eliminate the stress response. That's impossible and unnecessary. What you're doing is reclaiming control over how far it goes. You're building the capacity to notice reactivity without obeying it. That gap between stimulus and response, that tiny space where you can breathe, reframe, and choose a different path, that's where calm lives. But you only access it if you train it. And this is the mental edge most people ignore. They think mental strength is about pushing harder, staying tougher. In reality, the strongest minds are the ones that can pause in the heat of the moment and choose deliberate action over automatic reaction. If you've ever looked back on a stressful moment and said, "I don't know why I said that," or "I wish I had handled that differently," what you're describing is a lack of nervous system regulation. And regulation starts by understanding this reactivity is your default, but it doesn't have to be your destiny. Calm is not just a mental state, it's a physiological state. When we talk about staying calm under pressure, we're not just talking about mindset or attitude. We're talking about actual shifts in the body that either help regulate your stress response or amplify it. And one of the fastest, most powerful ways to shift your physiology is through your breath. Breathing isn't just about oxygen, it's a direct line into the autonomic nervous system. That's the system responsible for whether you're in fight or flight or in a rest and digest state. The amazing thing is, unlike heart rate or digestion, you can consciously control your breath. That means you can intervene in your stress response in real time. You can flip the switch. The key lies in how you breathe. When you're panicked or under pressure, your body naturally starts breathing through the mouth, short and shallow. That pattern of breathing actually tells the brain, we're in danger. It reinforces the stress. But if you shift to nasal breathing, especially with a long exhale, you send a completely different signal. You activate the parasympathetic nervous system, specifically the vagus nerve. That tells your brain, we're safe. No need to escalate. And that's not metaphorical, that's measurable. Heart rate slows, blood pressure stabilizes, cortisol begins to drop. Your frontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and logic, comes back online. There's a protocol I often recommend for immediate calm, the physiological sigh. It's a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, extended exhale through the mouth. That pattern mimics a natural reflex we use during deep sleep and emotional resets. 1 or 2 rounds of that can drop your stress response in real time. It's not magic, it's biology working in your favor, if you know how to use it. So when I say calm is a physiological state, what I mean is this: you don't need to think your way out of stress, you need to breathe your way out. You're not waiting for calm to arrive, you're creating it. That's agency, that's power. You can't always control your environment, but you can absolutely control your internal state. And the breath is the fastest, most accessible tool you have to do it. Most people walk through life as passengers to their nervous system, but the moment you take control of your breath, you're no longer a passenger. You're in the driver's seat. Most people wait for the chaos to come before they decide to train for calm. That's the equivalent of trying to learn how to swim in the middle of a riptide. It's already too late. The stress response is fast, milliseconds fast. By the time you're aware of it, your physiology is already on fire. Your heart rate is up, your vision narrows, and your thinking becomes reactive. That's why calm isn't something you switch on when things go wrong. It has to be built before the storm hits. You have to prepare your nervous system ahead of time, so when the stressor shows up, your system doesn't spiral out. It knows what to do. It's been there before. It has reps. Think of this like physical conditioning. You don't show up to a marathon without training and expect to run 26 miles. You prepare, you condition. You create familiarity with discomfort. The nervous system works the same way. The more you train it to stay regulated under pressure in controlled conditions, the more capable it becomes when the pressure is real and unpredictable. And this training doesn't require hours of meditation or some extreme biohacking protocol. It just requires consistency and intentional stress exposure. You deliberately expose yourself to small stressors, cold showers, timed breath holds, early wake-ups, physical training, silence, stillness, and you learn how to stay calm through them. That's the key. It's not just experiencing discomfort, it's learning to breathe, to focus, and to maintain awareness while you're in it. That's where real adaptation happens. You're not trying to avoid stress, you're building a better relationship with it. What we're doing here is expanding what's called your stress buffer. Most people have a small buffer. One difficult email, one bit of bad news, one rude comment, and they lose control. But if you train the system consistently, your buffer gets bigger. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable. What once triggered panic becomes background noise. You've conditioned your nervous system to stay online when others go offline. So the work has to happen before the moment matters. You don't get calm in the moment, you bring calm to the moment. And the only way to bring it is if it's been trained into your baseline, day after day, rep after rep, long before the world gives you a reason to need it. Controlled discomfort is not punishment, it's preparation. When you deliberately expose yourself to stress in a safe, structured way, you're not just toughening up mentally, you're rewiring your nervous system. Most people avoid discomfort because it feels unpleasant, and the brain is wired to seek safety and predictability. But here's what the neuroscience says: if you only operate inside comfort, your stress threshold stays low. That means the moment something hard shows up, emotionally, physically, socially, you tip into panic or shut down. You're not weak, you're undertrained. The nervous system hasn't had the chance to build resilience because it hasn't been challenged intentionally. Controlled discomfort flips that. You step into stress on purpose, and in doing so you signal to your brain, this is stress, but we can handle it. And the brain listens. It starts to associate challenge with growth instead of threat. That's when adaptation happens. You hold your breath past the point where it feels easy, and your brain learns to stay calm under oxygen deprivation. You sit in cold water, not to be extreme, but to show your system how to stay grounded when everything screams to escape. You delay gratification, resist the urge to pick up your phone, to react, to distract, and build the muscle of mental stillness. These aren't hacks, these are neural workouts. Each time you stay composed under stress, you're strengthening the circuits in the prefrontal cortex that regulate emotion and impulse. You're creating new baselines in your autonomic nervous system, and the benefits compound. Over time, what used to feel unbearable now feels familiar. Not comfortable, familiar. That's a crucial distinction. You're not becoming numb, you're becoming capable. You're not desensitized, you're trained. The beauty of controlled discomfort is that it gives you proof, real, biological proof that you can survive. Challenge. And once your nervous system knows that, it stops flinching. It stops overreacting. You go into the cold, into the silence, into the resistance, and your system doesn't panic. It adapts. That's the whole point. You're not chasing intensity. You're chasing adaptation. Because when life throws something hard at you, and it will, You want a nervous system that says, "We've been here before." Not just conceptually, but viscerally. That kind of confidence doesn't come from thinking, it comes from training. From choosing discomfort now, so you can stay calm later. The nervous system is highly adaptable. That's the core principle of neuroplasticity. It means your brain and body are constantly reshaping themselves based on experience. The neural circuits you activate repeatedly get stronger, more efficient, more automatic. So if you're constantly reacting to stress with panic, avoidance, or impulsive behavior, those responses become ingrained. You're training your nervous system, even if you don't realize it. But here's the good news, the opposite is also true. If you repeatedly respond to stress with calm, with presence, with regulated breathing and awareness, then that becomes your new default. You're not stuck with your current wiring, you can change it. And calm, over time, becomes less of a state you have to fight for, and more of a state you naturally fall into. The more often you stay grounded in high-pressure situations, the more you reinforce the neural pathways associated with stability. You're literally building stronger connections between the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of the brain, and the limbic system, which governs emotion and reactivity. That connection is what gives you the power to pause, to observe, to choose your response instead of letting biology dictate it. You're turning effort into efficiency. What used to take deliberate control eventually becomes automatic. Think of it like this. The first time you try to stay calm during discomfort, cold exposure, emotional stress, breath retention, it's difficult, you're forcing regulation. But over time, with enough repetitions, your system starts doing it on its own. That's neuroplasticity in action. The neurons that fire together, wire together. You breathe slower under pressure, not because you remember to, but because your nervous system expects it. That's when you know the training is working. And this is crucial, because stress isn't going away. The world isn't going to slow down and wait for you to catch up. But if your brain and nervous system have been conditioned to recognize stress without overreacting to it, then your baseline has shifted. You've raised your threshold, you now meet pressure with clarity instead of chaos. Calm becomes your reflex. And that shift, when calm moves from something you try to do to something you are, that's when you become dangerous in the best way. Because now, no matter what hits you, you've trained your system to stay online, to stay regulated, to stay in control. That's the real power of neuroplasticity, and it's available to anyone who's willing to put in the reps. Attention is the steering wheel of the mind. Wherever you place it, your entire physiology follows. And that's not philosophical, it's biological. Your brain has limited attentional bandwidth. It can't fully focus on everything at once, so what you choose to pay attention to literally shapes your internal state. If your attention locks onto a threat, real or perceived, your nervous system gears up for survival. If it locks onto the breath, the body, or the present moment, you shift into a state of regulation. That's why training attention is one of the most powerful ways to control stress. Because stress isn't just what happens to you, it's how your brain interprets and reacts to what happens. In high-stakes or high-stress moments, untrained attention jumps to the worst-case scenario. It scans for what's wrong. It catastrophizes. That's your brain's default. It's protective. But it also destabilizes you. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your thinking narrows. But when you train yourself to redirect your attention, consciously and repeatedly, you change the stress response at the source. You're not suppressing it, you're rewiring it. That's a critical distinction. Let's say something stressful happens. Someone criticizes you. You feel that jolt in your chest. If your attention zeroes in on the narrative, they're attacking me. I'm not good enough. This is a disaster. You've lost control. The limbic system takes over. But if in that moment, you direct attention inward, into your breath, into your feet on the ground, into the feeling of your ribcage expanding, you create space. You disrupt the circuit. And in that space, your body receives a different message. We're okay. Stay regulated. Stay present. And that space, that controlled redirect of attention, is something you can train. In neuroscience, this is often referred to as top-down control. It's your higher brain functions governing the more primal systems underneath. And it works, because the brain changes based on what you use. If you train focus through meditation, through breath control, through deliberate stillness, you are building the neural architecture for resilience. You're increasing the strength and efficiency of the anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, and the prefrontal cortex, areas deeply involved in emotional regulation and conscious awareness. Most people think calm is about removing stress. It's not. It's about where you place your attention in the presence of stress. That choice, repeated enough times, becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a trait. Calm isn't passive, it's directed, and attention is your lever. The prefrontal cortex is the command center of your brain. It's the part responsible for logic, decision-making, impulse control, and long-term thinking. It's the CEO of your nervous system. And the fascinating thing is, it's not always online. Under calm conditions, the prefrontal cortex is fully engaged. You can think clearly, weigh consequences, access your values. But the moment you tip into a high-stress state, when your heart's racing, adrenaline spikes, cortisol floods your bloodstream, that part of the brain goes offline. It's a biological survival mechanism. Your brain doesn't want you analyzing or strategizing when it thinks you're in danger. It wants you to act fast. That might work if you're being chased by a predator. But in modern life, an argument, a crisis at work, a tough conversation, it can be a disaster. You say something you regret, you make the wrong call, you freeze when action is needed. The ability to stay calm in any situation is really about your ability to keep the prefrontal cortex engaged when everything in your system wants to shut it down. And that's trainable. You can build the capacity to keep your executive brain online, even in the heat of pressure. One of the most effective ways to do that is through breath and sensory regulation. Because when you slow your breathing, or when you deliberately anchor your attention in a physical sensation, like the feeling of your feet on the ground or the sound of ambient noise, you send input to the brain that says, "We're not in danger." That input allows the prefrontal cortex to stay active, and when it stays active, you stay in control. This isn't just conceptual, it's visible in brain scans. When individuals are trained in breathwork or mindfulness, there's increased blood flow and activity in the prefrontal cortex during stress. That means they're not just enduring stress, they're responding to it from a higher cognitive state. They maintain access to language, perspective, empathy, and long-term planning. That's where real leadership, real presence, real composure comes from. So if you want to be the kind of person who doesn't crack under pressure, it's not about eliminating the stress. It's about keeping the right part of your brain engaged when the stress arrives. Calm is not the absence of intensity, it's the ability to stay connected to the part of yourself that makes the best decisions, especially when everything around you is screaming for the worst one. Mental strength doesn't come from a single moment of brilliance or from an epiphany that suddenly turns you into a superhuman. It's built through daily, consistent practice. Just like physical strength requires regular exercise, mental strength requires mental reps, deliberate, repeated actions that reinforce your ability to stay calm, focused, and clear under pressure. And these mental reps don't need to be long or complicated. They can be as simple as taking a few moments to center your breath before a stressful meeting, practicing mindfulness for 5 minutes a day, or engaging in a physical routine that challenges your body and forces you to control your emotional state. The point is, you can't expect to rise to the occasion if you haven't trained for it. When you practice mental resilience daily, it becomes less of a conscious effort and more of an automatic skill. The more often you engage in controlled discomfort, focus your attention, and regulate your emotions, the more these actions become ingrained in your brain. Over time, these responses become habits and your baseline shifts. What was once a challenge, maintaining composure under stress, now becomes something you do without thinking. It becomes your default. That's the power of daily practice. It's how you create the neurological foundation for staying calm when life throws curveballs. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean that every single day has to be intense or uncomfortable. Mental training is about consistency more than intensity. You're not always going to be in the most difficult situation of your life. But every time you engage in a small focused action, whether that's a deep breath during a tense moment, a cold shower, or simply sitting in silence for a few minutes, you're training your brain to stay calm in a chaotic world. Over time, these little actions compound, You're reinforcing neural pathways that enhance your ability to withstand stress, to pause before reacting, to choose response over impulse. The more mental reps you accumulate, the more you reinforce your ability to think clearly and remain composed, not just in the easy moments, but when the stakes are high. This doesn't mean stress or difficulty will disappear. It means your threshold for stress will increase, and your ability to stay steady under pressure will be something you can count on. So don't wait for the next stressful moment to practice calm, train it every day. It's the only way to ensure that, when things get difficult, you'll not only survive, but thrive. Most people think that mental and emotional resilience is about being unaffected by stress, that if you're calm you must be detached, indifferent, or even emotionless. But that's not true. Calm doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean you suppress or ignore your emotions. In fact, real calm involves a deep awareness of what's happening inside of you, the physical sensations, the thoughts, the emotional responses, and a conscious choice not to let them hijack your behavior. Being calm means being present with everything you're experiencing and still choosing how you respond, rather than letting your biology decide for you. This is where emotional intelligence comes into play. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and understand your emotions, and to use that awareness to guide your actions. It's not about suppressing emotions, it's about noticing them, observing them, and then choosing how you want to respond. When you train your mind to stay calm in any situation, you're simultaneously strengthening your emotional intelligence. You're learning to be more self-aware, more attuned to what's going on inside of you, and more skilled at managing how you express those emotions outwardly. The key here is that emotions are not enemies. They are signals. When you feel anxiety, it's your brain telling you that something needs your attention. When you feel frustration or anger, it's telling you that you're being thwarted in some way, or that your values or boundaries are being violated. These emotions are telling you something valuable. But if you react impulsively, without regulation, you lose the opportunity to use that emotional data to make better decisions. This is the part that most people miss. Calmness doesn't come from pushing emotions down, it comes from acknowledging them and then choosing the most effective course of action in response. That's emotional mastery. When you train yourself to stay calm, you gain the ability to recognize when an emotional trigger is activating your system, and instead of automatically reacting, you can use that moment to pause and recalibrate. That moment of pause is crucial. It's the space where you can decide to stay rational, to choose your response, to observe the emotion rather than be consumed by it. Over time, this becomes a cycle. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes to remain composed in stressful situations. You're not just surviving emotionally, you're thriving, fully aware, and in control of your responses. That's the true power of calm. It doesn't eliminate emotions, it allows you to use them effectively.